Hi everyone. Today we are very pleased to announce that Dr Erik Goodwyn will be joining the board at the Institute for Psychosystems Analysis. Dr Goodwyn, MD, is clinical faculty at the Billings Clinic, part of the WWAMI University of Washington School of Medicine, Billings, Montana affiliate, Department of Psychiatry and Clerkship for Medical Education at the University of Washington and Pacific Northwest University. He has authored numerous publications in the fields of consciousness studies, Jungian psychology, neuroscience, mythology, philosophy, anthropology, and the psychology of religion. He is co-editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Jungian Studies, and his published books include The Neurobiology of the Gods, How the Brain Shapes the Recurrent Imagery of Myth and Dreams, a psychological reading of the Anglo-Saxon poem Beowulf, Understanding Everything as Story, Healing Symbols in Psychotherapy, a Ritual Approach, Magical Consciousness, co-authored with anthropologist Susan Greenwood, and Understanding Dreams and Other Spontaneous Images, The Invisible Storyteller, which was a finalist in the 2019 International Association for Jungian Studies Book Award. He has delivered over 60 lectures, workshops and essays in peer-reviewed journals on the above topics, and has presented at conferences on these topics at sites in the United States, Switzerland and Ireland. Today we present a video podcast hosted between Dr Goodwyn and Steve and Pauline Richards on the core topic of ancestral memory, including conversation of dreams, trance states, clinical hypnosis, quantum psychodynamics, and the genomic self. Please let us know in the comments what topics you'd like to hear us discuss going forwards as we continue our strong collaboration between Dr. Goodwyn and IPSA going forwards. Thanks, and we really hope that you enjoy.
Great to see you, Dr. Goodwyn, and welcome to IPSA.
Yeah.
We've been long admirers of your work, and your books are set readings on our training courses as well.
Yes.
So great, really great to see you today.
Good to be here. Good to be here. Well, like I was saying earlier, I've been really getting into your videos and seeing that you guys think the same way I do. So I really like that.
How many of us is there?
No, there isn't. No.
No, nothing wrong with that.
No.
You all, one thing I noticed, you all speak Anthony Stevens. I really like that.
Yeah, he was a huge influence on us, and he very kindly wrote a very nice handwritten letter to us in, I think it was February of 1990, supporting us and what we were doing, how we were blending together George Engel's work and the Charing Cross model. He was aware of that with Jung, and that stayed with us and kept us going, didn't it, through some pretty tough times in the profession. Because now that you'll know there's resistance against biology, but 30 years ago it was absolutely terrible.
Yes, it was.
But anyway, we've got past that now.
We have, yes, we've fought a lot of professional battles, but we're putting the biology, back in there with the psychology, and they need one another. I think that's where we overlap, isn't it? Really, in our perspectives, we value the biology.
Well, yeah, because. And the thing I keep running into is I think there's this fear that if we bring biology into it, that somebody's going to come along and try to reduce the psyche to molecules, and that's it. But, sorry, hear the pipes playing. That's my phone. So, but what I was saying is that what I try to do is to elevate the biology, not to reduce the psychology. To show the divine and the magic and the emotion that you can see in the genome, because it's an incredible thing. And one of your videos, and I think in your handout that you let me read, talks about basically linking the genome with the self. And I've really kind of run with that idea. I've always kind of thought that, but I really like the way you put together. So you're getting the wheels turning for me to keep going with that idea, because I think you can do a lot with it.
Yes.
It seems to be inevitable that if Jung's psychological is really almost a psychologism of the self is real, then it must have a biological substrate. And of course, that just led from one thing to the other. And it fitted what we were seeing with people as well in terms of their lifespan developments. So it seems to be the right way to go.
Oh, I think so. I've been reading for the last couple of years. I've been playing around with the idea of ancestral memory, and the more I think about the genome as a biological basis for the self, the more I can see that it's. I mean, it's not just a metaphor. The genome itself carries all of the history of life on it, at least in part. And life has been around for 3.5 billion years. Yeah. That's how far back it goes. So, and of the 4 billion species that have existed since then, 99.9% of them are now extinct. So we're like the few, the proud, they're still here. And so that means that the genome must have just an incredible amount of specificity and information. And to hear, when I first started writing, hearing theorists say that the genome was not sufficient to carry symbolic information in it, I just like, that's crap. That's not true. Look how much it can do. And I think it seems to me that I've run into this with folks that understand genetics, at least on a passable level, but you don't really see the power of it until you dive into it. I'm sure, unfortunately, I guess James isn't here, but I mean, I saw in there that he has some expertise in molecular biology, so I bet he could definitely talk turkey with us. But like, there's this idea of gene and environment co-action being responsible for development and so forth, and that's great, but it really still doesn't do the genome justice, in my opinion, because the genome can transform and change the environment, but the environment doesn't really change the genome. If it does, we call that mutation. That's bad. That leads to death and the end of the genome, right? So it's really an asymmetry in those two things.
That's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah. There's a thing called there's a bunch of different mechanisms the genome has to repair damage done to it from the environment to repair it. So like there's this excision and extraction mechanism that the human genome has. It requires 30 different genes working in concert to go over the genome and repair any damage that was done to it from mutations. What people are talking about usually is epigenetic modification. Right. So I don't know how much you guys know about that, but the word epigenetic gets misused so often.
Yeah.
Oh, now we're in epigenetic development. That's not how that works. It's the fact that the genome is responsive to typical environments that it's going to encounter. So there's the thing you talk about in your videos that I really love is that it's always future looking.
Yeah.
Right. It anticipates environments. That's why we have legs and arms rather than fins. Duh. Why is it so hard to comprehend?
Yeah.
But if you divide the body from the mind in this rigid sort of dichotomy, then you typically just think, oh, that's just the body, right? And the mind can just do anything and be anything. And that's where you miss that connection with how the genome can influence the psyche. But you all talk about at the ground level, like you're talking the way you described some of your interactions with folks. I'm talking to someone and I'm seeing the genome interacting like right in real time with an affect or an image or a story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's That's great. I've seen that too, but not probably to the extent that you have.
It's an incredible thing, and over the years we've learned, and I've not yet been able to separate myself from this. I haven't been able to disprove it, should we say, that hypnosis is the ideal medium for mind-body so-called interaction, and translates, facilitate that informational transduction, opens up the pathways, psychoneuroendocrine, psychoneuroimmune, and can affect gene expression. And the therapeutic relationship for us is a field phenomenon, and it's so sensitive. You literally have to or we do anyway, we dissociate, we deliberately dissociate and become participants, observers of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Watch this interaction going so we can register ourselves, register the other, and that flow of information. You can feel changes going on, and they're physiological changes, and then various things manifest, which of course Jungians are aware of, but I honestly don't think that most of them follow the implications fully of what that really means, of how things manifest in mind, in consciousness, in the moment, and where they come from. We're very much admirers of Pierre Janet, his dissociative model. And I say,
well, I imagine so, if you're working with that all the time, so you probably see it every day.
Yeah, we do, and we teach it, and on the courses, particularly over the 3 years for that basic, we call it a basic course, incrementally build up that understanding of what hypnosis is without it necessarily being a formal transinduction. And there's so much you can do in that, in terms of information gathering and self-monitoring simultaneously. You call it parallel processing.
Yes, yeah.
There's such a lot, isn't there, that you can do?
There is such a lot, and of course there's so many different schools of hypnotherapy.
Yeah.
It's a broad church in that regard, but I think the beauty of it is the speed with which you can get results, that you can turn people around, and that you don't, I mean, you'll see a whole array of people in your work, Dr. Goodwyn, and I guess we kind of pride ourselves on reaching a broad demographic of people too, in the people that we see. And so we have to be very efficient in so much as we have to be very practical sometimes. And we know that hypnosis can work and work quickly. And so it's, you know, we wouldn't be without it, would we?
If I had to give everything else up, I would before I gave that up.
Yeah.
I really mean that now.
Yeah.
Once I would.
No, I understand. I believe you. I mean, we're used to, you know, as people inspired by Jung, I don't know if we're official card-carrying Jungians, I don't know, but anyway, we're used to working with dreams all the time. Well, that's a dissociative state and all that sort of stuff, you know. I remember reading this book called The Neuroscience of Religious Experience. And when I went through it, this was research I did for Neurobiology, the Gods. And it's a guy named Patrick McNamara. It's a great book. But he talks about the model of the psyche very similar to what you're describing, which the dissociability, and how you can have multiple possible selves is the way he put it. And anyway, so what he was describing there was what goes on in the brain when you have a religious ritual that is designed towards transformation. And you take the current ego and break it down through various means. So like you might use hypnosis, but then he'd also described using entheogens or repetitive, you know, like just exhausting sort of repetitive movements, drumming, all that kind of stuff, breaks it down. And then these possible selves come up and hopefully reintegrate into something that's stronger and more capable and more able to function, et cetera. Is that kind of similar to what you're describing?
Yeah, it is similar. Because of the long tradition in hypnosis, I mean, it is the foundation of all the psychodynamic and even the behavioral schools. Was systematic desensitization was originally a hypnotherapy method. A lot of people don't know that.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
Yeah, Joseph Wolf originally developed that as to be used within hypnosis, but a lot of the early people weren't particularly good at it, unfortunately. And it's a matter of history, of course, that it frightened Freud. You know, the strength of the transference, he didn't know how to deal with it. And Jung had a few unfortunate experiences with it, with transference again, but the kinds of mistakes that they made a beginner now would not make. It's moved on so much that that would never happen. At least with well-trained hypnotherapists, because unfortunately it's like a loaded gun. You know, you can learn to harm somebody very, very quickly with it, but learning to help someone takes a lot of time. But I wouldn't be without it, for sure. But in terms of the dissociability, we aim to create, and this is following Piaget, but it's moving on a little bit, an alternative ego position. And we use that very much, rather than, say, emotionally abreact someone. We create a dissociation, so the abreaction is expressed without affect or arousal as such reaching consciousness. And even the body itself isn't doing anything particularly. But there might be an ideomotor movement, say the movement of a finger, or a hand might be shaking like that. And that's it, that's the abreaction. The ego is a passive observer of what's going on, but what's really going on, we're building a vessel, this alternative projection of the ego, within which to receive the information that's hidden behind the abreaction, but minus the emotion. So it's the interpretation of a signal that is not met full force by an ego that can't contain it. So we get this symbolic abreaction, and then we get the information moved into this safe vessel, which is then integrated, and it's coated. It's coated so it doesn't cause any harm. And once it's inside the ego and what we would call the self-concept, it can unpack itself and create reassociation. So it's fully and properly integrated, rather than it simply being an idea about integration. This is a safe way for something to be reintegrated, minus the affect. But to set that up, you need to build rapport, a deep rapport.
But yeah, I bet. It sounds like a lot of that. I mean, that's the goal of therapy. What you just described. It's just the method of getting there is different from a lot of schools.
Yeah.
What I teach here is just sort of classic dynamic therapy, general principles. I throw some Jung in there, but that's what we're trying to do as well. But we don't, since I'm not an expert in hypnosis, I don't use it. I don't know it yet. But
you probably do informally, Dr. Goodwyn.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is I think I informally use this kind of stuff.
Do. Yes.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times when I'm working with folks, I'll shift the way that I talk, and I'll start to have a lulling, sort of lilting sort of voice, and blah, blah, blah. And I'll sort of lull them into that. And I'll kind of go into it myself too.
That's right. That does happen. Yeah.
Right? That happens? Okay.
Yes.
I'm glad that that's the case. But that's supposed to happen. Okay, good.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. But then I'll, a lot of times too, if I'm not sure what's going on, I'll kind of do that to myself and see what emerges in my own mind. And then sort of passively suggest it as a possible thing to consider, rather than, I'm interpreting this is exactly what's going on with you. That doesn't work. That bounces right off the ego walls.
Yeah.
But instead to suggest it and kind of invite them into this free-floating space where we're trying to figure out what's going on. It sounds like something similar to what you're talking about.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're utilizing naturalistic trance states and waveforms and harmonic resonance, and this is what the old hypnotists, people like Charcot for sure, but also Piaget, would have called sympathetic resonance. It's a field phenomenon, and metaphor is the ideal method of communication because the bandwidth is huge. Consciousness in the form of the Miller number can't take that. It listens, but it can't take it, which means a lot of what's embedded within a metaphor gets past it and it goes directly into the unconscious.
Yes, I've noticed that many times.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a great way to sneak information in.
It is because the unconscious will make sense of it. And it unpacks the unconscious at that point, and then things change. People say, well, I don't know why I'm changing. Nobody asked me to. Yeah.
I got a great example. Maybe this is what you're talking about. I'm not sure exactly, but I'll give you an example of something that I did once. I was working with, this was back when I was in the Air Force. I had a war vet, and he had severe trauma from multiple ambushes and so forth. And he had this flipping back and forth between being extremely paranoid and anxious and obsessive, like wanting to clean for hours, to like emotionally numb kind of rage monster.
Wow.
And he couldn't figure out how to get from one end to the other without just, you know, flipping back and forth. And so when he was describing this to me, it's like he would say, I feel like a flip switches and I go off, you know. And so I said, okay, well, maybe what we need to do is figure out how to put a dimmer switch on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that stuck because later on it came up and he said, yeah, I feel like maybe I have a dimmer switch on. I wonder where that idea came from. And
Yeah.
you know, it's like, yeah, where did that idea come? Man, it's just brilliant. Who thought of that?
So you're doing it naturally all the time. That's quite clear. I mean, that kind of technique would be used in something like NLP for sure. So, but you know, some people, I think it's true to say some people don't have to be taught as such. And you know, the fact that you're doing things in that informal way in some ways is better. I mean, that's the kind of thing that Milton Erickson would have done with language patterning and metaphor and so on. Everything really was done in a covert way, which of course, you know, is met with less resistance from people. But the minute that someone comes through the door, you know, that process begins.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, and the way that you position yourself, and if you with your eye gaze and theirs, and you do all of these navigations.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
And it's hard to teach how to do that exactly.
It is.
Yes. Yes.
Because it's that's where I usually just tell my residents that's where the art comes in. You know? And I'll explain it, and they'll go yeah, and then I'll watch them, and I'm like, more work to do. Yeah.
Well, everything you do in your life obviously stacks up, doesn't it, in terms of how you do things, how you relate to people, how comfortable you are with what you're doing, and all of those things, they all contribute. And I think you kind of get to a stage in life where we call it the Barefoot Approach, where you literally have to respond to something spontaneously in the moment. And at that point, sometimes all theory goes out of the window.
Yeah.
Yes, and something else informs you. Sometimes it's the self, for example, speaks or speaks through you, because as Steve was saying, we parallel process things, and sometimes we and other people find themselves in situations where they say things with a kind of certainty or authority that they know is not them, but they find themselves saying those things nonetheless. And when those moments happen, they're truly transformative, I think, for everyone concerned. But you can't teach that. You're right. It's
very tough. It's very tough. The transcendent function, I guess you might call some of that.
Yes. Jungians will call it that for sure.
Where it takes a life of its own almost. That is it's the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? It's this thing that happens between, it's a field phenomenon, like you said. That's a great way to put it. I have a physics background, so I like metaphors like that, these quantum mechanics and stuff like that, collapsing the wave function and all that. Yeah, it's like, I dig that.
Oh my word.
Yeah, James is very much into that.
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking to Professor Stuart Hammeroff.
We are,
on the channel as
Yes.
well.
Oh, great. Yeah.
There's an awful lot there, which we're looking into with him, you know, which is nice.
I can imagine. Yeah, he's. I read the Orchar theory paper.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with that. It's been a while since I read it, but there was a while there when I was really diving into quantum consciousness theories, and I obviously came across Penrose and Hammeroff's work. Great stuff.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Henry Stapp's another one. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Oh, sorry.
Henry Stapp.
No, we're not familiar with him.
No. Okay. Well, he's a physicist who also, he comes at it from a different perspective. But it's all that I was reading that because I was interested in the mind-body problem. I was trying to get that sorted.
It's pretty much inevitable for us, I think, to go this way. And it's really odd because Pauline, she's kept everything, you know, way back from the 80s, filing cabinets full of old stuff, you know, that we were working on. I had a little look the other day and I was surprised at what I was finding, and we were basically into informational monism at that time and looking to build a model that would be built on that, which was Platonic in many respects. And of course, we found about Roger Penfold and Stuart Hameroff's ideas, which are Platonic, but they're into the quantum world as well, and microtubules. And we were presently working on what we hope might be a model of quantum psychodynamics. This is just too much of a coincidence, and we reached out. And so we'll be chatting to him about that.
That's great. That's great.
The bridge for us will be hypnosis and altered states of consciousness.
Are you familiar with any of the work of Harold Atmanspacher?
That's a familiar name. Yeah.
He's got a lot of really interesting stuff about quantum mechanics and consciousness, and he's also a Jungian himself.
Right.
As well. So definitely, he's coming out with the new books too. So that should be fun.
Yeah.
Be fun.
Yeah. The only thing I find with Jungians is that they have this aversion to hypnosis, and that they're very much fixed in the past. They say, well, Carl Jung rejected it, so we will, and that.
So we must. Yeah.
It gets gene replicated or meme replicated down the generations, and they've all rejected something and know nothing about it, which is a great shame.
It is. It's considering that, like you said, a lot of people use the techniques informally anyway, so you might as well formally understand it better.
They do. I mean, even alchemy, really, if we consider that to be a metaphor for communication between idealism and materialism in broad brush terms, between mind and body, this is the absolute ideal method of entering into that.
Yeah, well, Ernest Rossi really got us into that, didn't he, with his psychobiological hypnosis, and we've never looked back.
No,
it's just incredible. I mean, the actual amount of work that stacks up behind the method is, you know, he was second to none, really, I think, in terms of his research and talking about informational substances and the various, you know, psychoneuroendocrine and so on pathways. It's just so good to have that science behind it.
Yeah, he was looking at gene expression and trans states as well, and he was a supporter of our work, and I have consulted him. I mean, he recently died, but long ago, it was 1999. He was giving me some help with patients, some of them with disease processes. And I'm not making any claim about cures, by the way, in that sense. But he was very, very helpful with some extremely difficult cases to be able to frame a treatment and intervention plan. It was very helpful.
Yeah, and this probably connects to what you're talking about some, but I'd like to teach our residents that symptoms, even physical symptoms, are communications.
Yes.
As a way to try to understand the psychological, symbolic meaning is what we're after of whatever it is, you know, like, and being a psychiatrist gives us, we have kind of an advantage in the sense that we play with the medications, right? So if I give someone a medication and they get a weird side effect that makes no physiological sense, then I know I'm dealing with one of these communications. I need to understand it. Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of psychiatrists will, well, maybe not a lot, hopefully not a lot, but some will just sort of dismiss that and say, well, you know, that doesn't make any sense, so it must not be possible, you know.
Yeah.
But it's a part of their experience, right? So we need to figure that out, ideally.
Yeah.
So I look at that as, if I'm providing a medication and their body is essentially rejecting it, even though they're physically telling me that they want to take it and they want to get better, but their body is saying, I don't trust this. So I'm going to give you some weird side effect that doesn't make any sense. And so that'll show you, you know.
Yeah.
So when that happens to me, I know I need to start working on rapport, feeling trust, building trust, that kind of stuff. And oftentimes that works really well. Or I'll shift gears and I'll say, well, let's try a different one, but we'll do a baby dose.
Yeah.
Right. So I use the dose as a metaphor for intensity.
Yes.
And that sneaks in there and says, this person is concerned about how I feel. That's what they really want. That's what they're really worried about. I think that's what often those symptoms and side effects are about. They're about, I don't really trust what you're trying to do here. So, and I don't want to say that, right? Because you're the doctor and I don't want to upset you, but my body's going to say it.
Yeah.
And then I can just blame that, because they're stuck in this dualistic mode of mind is way over here, body's way over there, They don't realize that it's all like this,
Yes.
So then I'll say, okay, so we're going to try, and that's when I go, well, okay, so we're going to need to try a smaller dose, right? And I stare, direct eye contact and yes. So I'm giving away all my secrets, but what they really want is to feel listened to, right? That's just so human.
Yes.
And so it makes sense, and they deserve that.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
And it often works because that's what they're really after.
Yes.
You meet so many people who don't know how to listen. They think they do, but they listen as an ego or an ego to the soma effectively, and it doesn't speak the same language. That's a barrier, and we find that with therapy colleagues as well.
That's great.
You mentioned about the separation between mind and body conceptual.
Yeah.
The problem with that with Jungians, when they go on about the psychoid boundary, that's psychoreductionism. And I know that the Jung said, well, I can't take my psychology any further than this, so it's no longer psychology. The information is gone, it's somaticized, it's in matter, it's not anymore. Well, Rossi showed that that's not the case. It's all about levels of analysis, description, explanation, and communication, and how each level passes on the same information. So you get a kind of a superpositioning within say a biopsychosocial stack of something we could call a complex, which is simultaneously congruent in the sense that there is a physiological register, there's a psychological and a psychosocial register, and it manifests as a profile at all those different levels. But the person's aware of a somatic symptom as a signal, but doesn't know how to talk to it. It talks to it as if it were a person. And what we've learned for sure with very deep structure hypnosis is that the psyche as such doesn't want to do that. It wants to communicate in a different way. And when we open up that rapport, the signal will change very, very rapidly, or it will attenuate completely. And it's a case of a dialectic, but with different languages. And then the safe space, if you like, that third option appears between the two. So it's all about moving energy and information around.
Yeah, that tracks. That tracks. What I teach is that you have to be able to listen along multiple channels.
Yes.
You hear what they say, but then you look at the behavior and the body positioning and the facial expressions and the tone of voice, and it's a lot to teach, because you're, like you say, it's a large bandwidth, right? You have to be able to listen to the whole radio all at once.
Yes, you do.
Every channel all at once, and then make your mind, make up your mind what you want to do.
Yeah, it's definitely a signal to noise issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
And a figure ground too.
Yeah.
And I have this habit of always going to the ground. I accept the figure because the figures manifest, but the figure can distract. I always go to the ground, and I won't understand the figure because there's no context. And the context in our way of doing things as a psychologically based therapy is always to find out what the ground wants of the figure, which by metaphor is, if we were Jungian in orientation, say, for the sake of argument, we say, what does the unconscious want, or what's its opinion of the ego, which is the figure standing on the ground? Because we believe it's bigger than that. It's not just that kind of psychoreductive thing. So I always go to the context and accept what manifests, and then talk to the context, and then unusual things happen, and people wonder, what's going on? I'm feeling better, and I don't know why. Well, we asked somebody else, don't you remember? We got a second opinion on you from the inside. And how did that happen? Well, we talked. Don't you remember? We talked about a little story, and something happened, and you were looking a bit puzzled about that, wondering what was going on. And then something happened usually within 48 hours. And James tells us that that's related to the way the genes express, which is interesting.
I was just going to ask if it's a way of thinking about talking to the genome, as it were.
Yeah.
In the psychological manifestation of it.
Yeah, I mean, you can often, and this would surprise, a lot of therapists think this is impossible, but that's because they're not in the right modality of relating to understand how it's possible. But you can actually get an indication of a day or a date, and it may be 2 or 3 months downstream, and something will happen by then. And if you've built up the respect, so that the other, we'll call it the unconscious, agrees. I always ask that question. I always ask the unconscious, is it okay for me to help this person? Will you allow me to help them? And if it comes back as yes, I'm absolutely sure that we will get somewhere.
So I'm wondering if you have an example of this that you could share with us.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm so curious as to hear this.
I use Chevreul's pendulum. Now, I don't overuse it, but I do use it. That's the hypnotist. I haven't got it with me, unfortunately. The hypnotist pocket watch.
Yeah.
There are ways of calibrating that. And I guess I'm giving things away now, but that's okay. Why not? I will always demonstrate it on myself. And it's simple. You hold in such a way that your elbow supported, your wrist is completely limp, and there's a pincer grip. You hold the T-bar on the chain, and you look at it and you wait for it to rest. You take all the twist out of it, and then you say something which you know is true. And you might look at the person that you're with when you say it, and they say, it's absolutely true that whoever is sitting directly opposite me now. That's absolutely true. And you wait, and then it'll move. Now, it's an idiomotor movement, which means it's unconscious, not consciously directed, but it will confirm it. And very often it's a forwards, backwards movement like that. And I always say, thank you. Always thank the unconscious, and building up that connection. Say, can you now cause the watch to be still? And we wait, and then it slows down and it stops, and you say, thank you again. And then you say something which is not true, but you put your absolute best persona lie in place and say, it's absolutely true that so-and-so is in the room. They've just walked in now, and they're wearing whatever. And you say it with as much conviction as you can, and you wait, and it'll move the other way, like it's nodding its head. Then you hand it to the person. You ask them to hold it, you tell them how to do it, and then you ask a question. Say, for example, can I talk directly to the unconscious mind of whoever? And you wait, and then it'll come forward, and you say, thank you. And it builds like that. And I always ask the question, is it okay for me to help this person today? And it might go circular. So it's ambiguous, or there's something that's not been, and you go on like that. Eventually you get something, and it might say, yes, it's okay, you can do it, you know, and basically complete trust. And then I can say with confidence, I have rapport with your unconscious, and we can make progress. And they felt it, they felt a dissociation. They're still normally conscious, but they're seeing that dissociation play out through an idiomotor phenomenon, the kind of thing that Jung explored and Pierre Janet did when they were looking at complexes. So in essence, we're talking to not the complex, but the homeostatic mechanism, that which regulates all. It's outside of their problem. And this is what we say to them. We're not talking to that part of you that's distressed. We're talking to the part of you that wants you to be well.
The hidden observer, right?
Yeah, that's another name for it.
Yeah.
So are we, sorry, Paul, you're going to say?
I was going to say, because Dr. Goodwyn was asking too, I think, for examples of how the unconscious, you know, signals things.
I'm sorry.
And I was just thinking.
No, that was amazing. That was great. But I was actually asking for like a clinical case, maybe that.
Yes, yeah. The guy who you did a similar thing with, who left, and you watched him leave.
I did.
You saw the traffic lights.
It was this case study's on the YouTube, but it was a guy who had eczema, and he had it on his palms, wrists, and he had it on his ankles, and he'd had it since he was a child. Cut a long story short, his mother had handed him a glass of water and some cod liver oil capsules and said, take them before you go to school. He's 9 years old, and he refused. And she said, oh, you'll be the death of me. Sent him to school. He came home and he found her dead, and that was a massive trauma. Sure. And he was in Scotland, and he had to move some 300 miles to other relatives in England. He's with his brother. This was the journey to go and live with his family, and there was a kiosk there, and somebody offered him a drink, and he reached out and his hands shook violently as a child, and he couldn't take the drink. He always had to make the drink himself and have it. He could never receive one. And then later he got the eczema. And he was very resistant, very, very resistant, very enclosed within himself. And I worked with him. I didn't use the pendulum, but we used a hypnotic style communication channel. And I asked his unconscious if it would be all right for him, when the unconscious was ready, to remember, because consciously he'd forgotten all of this, remember what it was, when it would be safe for him to tell me, and then we can move him on, when we can overcome everything in the past as eczema would go, and he'd be all integrated. And he was definitely in a trance state because his eyes were bulging at that point. And he gets up and he leaves the consulting room. And it was that night, and I watched him. He went down into his car, drove out, he turned left, and there were traffic lights, they were on red. He stopped at the traffic lights. I was just watching him. They went green and drove through, turned right. He came back and said, as I went through the traffic lights, when they turned green, it all came back to me. And I was told from within, I can now tell you. And he was crucifying himself. In effect, it was a stigmata through eczema. Mm-hmm. The whole thing joined up, and it was, to cut a long story short, sorted out. But that's the kind of thing you can do. And he'd had help, but no one had bothered to try to build the bridge and say, is it safe? Can it be
right? Yes, I can see. Yeah, that makes total sense.
And there are others where it's downstream. Weirdly, I've even had dreams where where it's been said, not now, in 3 months' time. You tell the person, in 3 months' time, we can tackle this. And I do. And they say, it's going to take that long. I said, yes, but you can rest. You don't need to worry. It'll all be sorted out, and you don't have to think about it. And then there are other times when you can use metaphor. At the arrival of spring, it literally walks across a field at the pace we always say of a walking lady. And it arrives on the south coast of England, and it walks, and somebody might be 2 days walk away. In 2 days' time, she'll arrive with the spring, that kind of thing. And they go away, and 2 days later, the change happens that they wanted, that kind of thing. There's so much that can happen. Once you have that rapport field built and you interact and you feel it, you can do an immense amount.
So the dissociation, at least temporarily, of the ego from, I guess, itself, maybe,
yes,
is what you need. You have to teach someone to disengage from willing things to happen within the psyche and just rather allow them to spontaneously emerge.
Yeah.
Much like a dream state.
It is like a dream.
Yeah.
We know myths, they're like dreams of cultures, as Jung said. But we have a slightly different way of looking at dreams than a lot of Jungians do. We're very interested in the continuity between the waking ego and the dream ego and the perspectives they have. And when we teach our students about working with dreams, and we don't push dreams, we don't even invite them, but we always take them when they appear. And that way we get mileage out of what we get. You know,
right.
If you overuse it starts to just become a joke. You see the trickster coming through and all sorts. But
right.
What we do is that basically they share one thing. The dream ego and the waking ego share the self-concept. That is to say, the autobiographical memory and everything that's been associated to it.
Right.
But when the waking ego slips into the dream ego state, along with the identity of that is me, you also get all of those complexes which are most closely associated to the ego at that time, and they're pulled in with it.
Yes.
They have as little say in the matter as the dream ego does. There's something else which is operating, which provides the scenario, the narrative, and the complexes are forced to act out in the same way the dream ego is. Whereas the Jungians tend to follow Jung and say the complexes are the architects of dreams. I don't think they are at all. I think they're pulled into it every bit as much. And the regulation is on a much higher scale, and it's basically homeostatic. And we're seeing that trying to be worked through. And that's one reason why we don't have to work with dreams most of the time, because what's acted through is the image of a metabolic process It's at one level physiological, and another level it's psychological, being represented in imagery whilst the brain is in a dreaming state. And we don't normally have to pay any attention to it, but when it's not sufficient, it can't be dealt with at that level, we do have to do something, and then the ego is tasked with adaptation. So that's, you know, the way that we generally look at them. And also, as you've said in your books, and particularly in the neurobiology, the gods, I found a very impressive thing about just how many dreams are instinctive in nature, fundamentally. And when we look at that, that's what we see. We see that the narrative of the dream is fundamentally instinctive. And that
yes, that's the self and or the genome orchestrates it, and there's always this debate about whether or not it's you know, coming from your lived experience or whatever. But the thing I've noticed, and this you can see in studies of memory, is that number one, memory is largely imagination. It's really not a retrieval process, and all these computer metaphors that they use, it's a bunch of baloney. It's you basically create it with your imagination, and it's loosely based on what actually happened, more or less. But it's orchestrated towards emotional goals and self. So you're much more likely to remember accurately if it's emotionally intense and it has to do with you.
Yeah.
So that makes perfect sense. So, but the way I teach this is that same process, memory consolidation, which is in a lot of dream literature, is going on in dreams, only the dream is not concerned so much with what happened. It's more concerned with what does what happened mean. And it uses symbols to depict that.
Yeah.
But it takes things that have happened to you and it breaks them up into pieces and then rearranges them into these archetypal structures. That's where the instinct comes in. Yeah. And so like, I remember I was discussing this with someone once, and they were talking about the Red Book. And they were pointing out that in the Red Book, the pictures of Philemon, the face, it looks like Freud, basically, you know. And so they were saying, yes, okay, so this is the personal stuff. And whereas Jung was always talking about it being archetypal, but it's really all this personal stuff, you know. And I said, yeah, but Freud didn't really wear robes and fly around on wings, did he? No, that stuff is the archetypal stuff. And so, yeah, it takes bits and pieces of your own experience, but it arranges it according to its own rules, right? You don't get dreams that exactly repeat experience, except in the case of severe trauma. And that's pathological. That's because you're stuck in the complex, right? You're stuck in the past. But more often than not, it's taking what happened at the day residue, right? But it doesn't ever verbatim repeat it. And, you know, Jung recognizes, he talks about this in his books. He says, it's so easy for people to say, oh, I dreamed about walking across, 11th Street. And, you know, I did that yesterday. So that's why I had that dream. Okay. Well, what else was going on? Did that happen too? Usually not.
No.
Usually not. And so then I wonder, well, why is that there? You know, and then the other thing about dreams is the way that, like I love the way you put it, because something in there is orchestrating it.
Yeah.
And it is not you.
No.
Yeah.
You don't go to sleep saying, I want to dream about, you know, X.
Yeah.
You just sort of find yourself in this environment, and it's incredibly realistic. And who came up with it, right? And then stuff happens and you interact with it, but who came up with that part? It isn't you. So what I tell my residents, when I'm usually the first class or so, is you need to think about that. And if it doesn't disturb you, you haven't thought about it enough. It should be disturbing to you that happens every night. Which is, of course, where the idea of the invisible storyteller comes from. But it's my way of giving a new name to the self, really. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And it's all oriented towards individuation.
Yes, yeah. So it's kind of disturbing and reassuring at the same time, in a way.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke, you know.
Yes.
It's disturbing because you normally think everything that goes on in my head is because I put it there.
Yeah.
Or because I learned it.
Yes.
But the big lesson of depth psychology is, especially Jungian oriented, is that 99% of what's in there wasn't put in there by you or your experience. It came from the genome, it came from the self, it came from all of this instinctive processes.
That's very much in line with ancestral memory, and I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah. So if you look at, say, I start off with something very simple, like the E. coli organism, very simple, and it has in its own little tiny genome this thing called the Lac Operon. I don't know if you've heard of this or not. No?
Not in that detail, no.
Not that deep, okay. Well, without getting too lost in the weeds with it, it's basically E. coli likes to eat glucose. That's its favorite food. But sometimes it doesn't have that. And so if that's the case, then the Lac Operon, which is a collection of genes, will it sends out these proteins that detect whether or not there's glucose or lactose in the environment. If there's lactose, it turns off the glucose eating proteins and turns on the lactose eating proteins. Okay, so you might think, well, big deal. But it is a big deal, because where did the E. coli learn how to do that? It didn't. It's embedded in the genome. So now this is called epigenetic modification. That's what it really is, when the environment modifies how the genome behaves. But even saying it like that, saying the environment influences the genome, is a bit misleading, because what's really going on is that the genome is testing the environment and saying, what's out there that I know I already know that I need. And if this isn't there, but this is, then I'm going to shift and grab that. So it is responding to the environment. It's not necessarily being influenced by the environment. So even in this case, if you look at it as gene environment co-action, it's kind of like saying that the statue of David is Michelangelo and stone lump co-action.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't really make a good explanation.
Yeah.
Michelangelo's behind it all, right? Yeah, he needs rock. He needs a lump of stone to work with. But the genome has something the environment doesn't have, and that's an agenda. The environment's just sitting there, right? But the genome has an agenda, right? It's going to test the environment. It's going to be constantly monitoring all this stuff, and it can happen throughout the lifetime.
Yeah.
That's another thing that drives me bananas, is it can only be innate if it's there at birth.
Yeah.
I hate that because it's so dumb, right? Because what in the world does that matter, whether it's at birth or not? Secondary sex characteristics is usually the only thing I have to mention. It's like, okay, that happens 10, 12 years after birth.
Yeah. Yes.
Has nothing to do with what you experienced.
No. Time
you don't learn how to do that. It just kicks in.
Yeah, it's on the clock, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. It's on a clock.
Yeah.
And I think that the more that I look at this, the more I think what's going on is we encounter a certain scenario. The genome metabolizes it. And this is where I think people run into troubles, because I'm crossing the mind-body barrier with that sentence, that the genome is processing what's happening to me psychologically. It's, but then it responds, and it responds with an instinct, just like the Lac Operon. It didn't need to be learned. It's already there.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's there, but it's there because of our massive evolutionary history. So the way I put it, your genome is basically the latest reproduction of something that started 3.5 billion years ago. And, that's lots of different species. If I go back far enough, I've got a fish as an ancestor.
Yeah.
That's kind of weird to think about, but it is true.
Yeah.
But we don't necessarily have to go that far back. Humans have been around for 200,000 years. So even that is an unimaginably large amount of time. And that's all within the same species. So it's been a long time to refine all of that stuff. So I think what happens, we run into in a situation, the genome metabolizes it, processes it. It doesn't matter where we are in life, it'll produce it. And yeah, what we've experienced will overlay that. But the ultimate source of it is the genome.
Yeah.
And it'll be a dream, it'll be a feeling, it'll be who knows what. And when I say ancestral memory, I'm basically looking at the different layers. That I have 5 different layers that I've divided up into. Right? So the deepest layer is the one that we share with every mammal and reptiles and birds. Okay, and that's just, there's a handful of genes that are responsible for creating the ability to integrate sensory information and make a decision of what to do. So obviously any animal needs that. So that goes really far back. Then above that is the reptile brain, which Panksepp and Anthony Stevens talk about a lot. Great stuff. So I don't need to explain that guy to you guys. You already know about that. But those are all very much in there. And then you've got the social layer that deals with all of the mostly human stuff, like instincts to learn a language, instincts to be concerned about your social status, and all of that stuff that goes on with the social dynamics. I think all that's instinctive.
Yeah.
We're very intensely social animals, and if we don't feel like we're a part of a tribe or something, we feel intense loneliness. But other animals don't do that.
Yes.
Like solitary animals like tigers or bears, they don't care what other bears think about them, you know, in the wee hours of the night. It doesn't occupy their minds. They don't give a crap. Well, we're not that, right? We're not that. We're always worrying. Why? Well, it's because we cooperate to survive. So that's we put all our eggs in that basket. So that's got to be instinctive too.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's the cultural layer. This would be things that have influenced our genome from not just 200,000 years ago, but in between that and say maybe 9,000 years ago. So like a couple of examples of that would be body type based on where most of your ancestors are from. You know, if you're mostly from Northwestern Europe in ancestry like I am, so you kind of have the long torso and you've got, you know, a body type that's more adapted to colder climates and light skin and all that kind of stuff, light colored eyes. That's an adaptation too, and it's from that more recent ancestral history. The question is, does any of that translate into the psyche? Which I don't think any studies have been done on this, but anecdotally, I've certainly experienced what I feel like is related to that. Particularly when I first when I first visited Ireland. I didn't come back to it. I'd never been there.
Yeah.
But my genome had been there.
Yeah.
I did the 23andMe, so I knew that some of the genomes had been there for 9,000 years.
Yes.
And so I did, and this was after I had first visited it, and I had a lot of these weird deja vu experiences that went there, and I was like, man, I feel like I've been here before, but I know I've never been here before, and that's just bizarre. I didn't know how to process that, and until later I was thinking maybe it's some kind of ancestral memory, you know, maybe it's something that embedded itself and that this environment triggered a response just because of the sheer thousands of years of exposure along certain of my own, you know, family lines. So then the final layer is the transgenerational layer. So that would be intergenerational transmission of trauma, which I know you guys have probably heard of.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that's pretty well known, but nobody knows how to explain it exactly. There's some people think that it's epigenetic transmission of information. So that would be DNA methylation, amongst other mechanisms, where something traumatic can happen to you, but your grandchildren can still be affected by it.
Yeah.
So that's part of ancestral memory too, right on up to, you know, mom and dad. So that's my layers. That's how I parse it out. And all of that stuff is operating, I think, and can emerge and respond at any point.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, we work with this by different names, but certainly the same observations and perspectives clinically, and very often that's absolutely what you need to access in order to blow, and I'll use it metaphorically, blow complexes away. To blow individual, relatively recent learning is to hook into that trail. I very often say that. I very often ask people to look over their shoulder and see the line, if it's a man, the line of men back over the horizon. And are they all nodding, or are they doing that? You know, metaphorically, because being in aligned with your instincts in that way and with your ancestry, and people say, oh, well, I don't like my parents, I didn't like my grandparents. That's just 2 generations.
Yeah.
As you said, your genome is ancient, and pretty much everything that we've experienced that's meaningful has been experienced before. And the metaphor is looking back, but it's also looking within because of the expression of those instincts through the genome in the present. And instincts always look forward, complexes always look back. So let's look forward.
I love that distinction. It's so accurate. You know, I never knew that I knew that until you said it. It's like, yeah, that's true. I never realized that, but yeah.
They want you to go back. They want you to be infantile. They want you to be fixated. And there's so many therapists who will do inner child work or say this is because of a Kleinian issue over whether you were breastfed and whether that was favorable or not. And it does not help adaptation. It's neurotic because it causes the ego to split, and it generates trouble in the self-concept as well. That's disintegration. Integration means alignment and purposive action forward, knowing you're connected to the past in a healthy way.
Yeah, and the fact that the genome anticipates environments is so important to this.
Yes.
Because it's not just there to build a body that you then fill in with whatever, and it's completely meaningless and arbitrary. No. No, the genome is like, you're moving forward, you need to move forward. And if you're not in line with that, but we do have free will, right? I think Jung was correct to say the ego is a autonomous center of consciousness, but then so is the self. And sometimes they're going in different directions and you get big problems.
Well, that's what we call an individuation neurosis, basically, is where the anticipated trajectory of lifespan developments on that clock of time release, as you were mentioning earlier. The intentionality, say, is vertical, and then something happens and we go. And the angle between those two is basically that which defines the individuation neurosis. If someone can get realigned with the intentionality of the genome, they will start to adapt very quickly. But the things that get in the way are complexes and complex social relationships and how they're internalized. And then they become part of ego-identified complexes that sit in the self-concept. And because we have a social brain, we tend to project internally that and expect the psyche to operate as a mirror of the outer world on the inside. And therapists get you to talk to these things that are fantasies. And in our experience anyway, that slows things down by generating too many targets. And most of them are mirages. But that essential connection on the inside, you then get a myth emerging from within, like a spontaneous dream. That will be, as you've put it, I've heard you say this, the stickiness of that which is within, that keeps a good myth alive. Then the resonance is true. So we haven't internalized a collective myth, which is not us, it's a fantasy. We generate something which finds its resonance elements in the environment, and then we connect. Connect that to the genome, we're on our way.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Good stuff, isn't it? I really admire you and your work. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And we both think this. We see you as part of this new generation that are paving the way for the future. It's great. You know, it's really great to talk to you and to learn from you.
Same here. I've learned a lot from you guys. So this is really cool. I try to learn from everybody I run into.
Yes, it's best to be open in that way, isn't it? And just going back for a moment to the idea of instincts and ancestral memory, we're using those ideas a lot with, because a lot of the people we see, for whatever reason, tend to be young men, don't they?
At the moment,
particularly with coming out of lockdown as well. And some of sort of the Paleolithic ideas about being locked in, you know, into the cave, and that idea of reaching back into the past and using that to get them to see just how important it is for them to get outside of the cave and to it's that hunter-gatherer thing, really, to get them out there and get their seeking system engaged and getting them hooked back up to life. And we find that's incredibly helpful, particularly with young men.
Oh yeah, especially with young men, you're going to get a hunter imagery.
Yes.
Ad nauseum. I went through the same thing when I did my own therapy. It was constantly there. And not that women can't do that, of course they can, but it tends to be very very strong in young men. Yeah, and that's those instincts, right? It's like you got to get out there. You got to seek. You got to find. You got to hunt.
Right.
Seek the mysteries and unlock the resources. Go on a quest. Right. That's the quest.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
It's foundational, isn't it, for the West? Sorry, I was thinking about the Arthurian idea of you and the land are one, that kind of thing, and the extension of that. And
see, well, I was just thinking that exactly the same thing. Arthurian myth. I love the Arthurian myth. Maybe we'll talk about that one of these days.
Yeah, but I really love John Borman's movie Excalibur. That's a beaut. That really is powerful. Yeah. Yeah, we find on the Paleolithic side, don't we, Paul, that particularly for young men, if we're talking about young men, the early imprinting with the mother. So we don't go there too much and get lost in all the Kleinian stuff and even some of the Freudian psychosexual stuff or the Oedipus, whatever. Simply to say that for a boy, it seems, under those conditions, that the relationship to the mother confirms for him how he relates to himself internally, not the outer world, but the inner world, and that world of bonding and first forming a relationship. So downstream of that, then, if a boy has been taught by his mother not to trust her, he's unlikely to trust his unconscious or his psyche. And that with men, you generally know how they're going to treat the unconscious by how they treat women. And that's a throwback, it seems. So that's like the idea of the cave in the Paleolithic. So the mother's the cave, and the young man should stand at the cave mouth with his father. It's his father's job to say, that is the world, and I'm handing you the knowledge of the horizon. 360 degrees. That savannah is yours, if you know. And then if he's not been properly inducted by his father, he will not trust the outer world, and he'll retreat back into the cave. And if his relationship to his mother's not been that good, he will be lost inside those formations and archaic, dark thoughts. And then you see a typical neurosis that forms around that. So we tend to concentrate on those primary relationships in that Paleolithic way and try to get people to begin a confirmation process that moves them away from being fixated on those in the past, but still access, as you say, for ancestral memory, the idea of the open savannah, and being completely free.
Right, because getting stuck in your own personal past is different from accessing the ancestral ancient past.
It is.
Yeah.
Right, because that's where the guidance comes from, the ancestors, the spirits, the gods, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, and that's why they exist, isn't it? These myths and these ritual practices. But so many young men are lost because the fathers either weren't right for them or the mothers were wrong for them in whatever combination. And they're hesitant at the cave mouth. The savannah's there, but they don't trust that because the father wasn't there. And they look back in the cave and it's dark because they can't trust their mother either. And that darkness is their inner darkness. Jung would have called it a negative anima. But we try to help them to align with that ancestral idea, but look forwards and then feel that they can go out into that savannah.
Right, because then you're calling on the help of all of those fathers and mothers.
Yes.
Not just pinning all of your hopes and dreams on one mother or one father, which nobody can possibly contain all of that need. Where in a society where a lot of times I think that stuff was distributed amongst many adults. But we, in modern culture, at least in the West, we don't have tribes and villages and all that sort of thing. Everybody's hyper individualized, and so that's a problem. All of that gets projected on the parents, which they can't contain that.
No.
Even if they try their best, they're always going to fall short.
Yes. It's inevitable. No matter how good you try to be, you'll never do it.
Yeah. Deep stuff.
Yeah, it's good though, isn't it? It's great.
Yeah.
It's meaningful. And you feel that it's meaningful when people's lives transform for the better. I think then you see what the psychopomp should be. So they come into someone's life and they don't possess someone, but they get out as soon as possible and leave the victory with the individual.
Yeah.
But it's been great talking to you, and I'm sure Pauline just said we both really look forward to talking to Erik again.
Yes, absolutely.
And we really look forward to you joining us at IPSA as well. and have a fantastic future.
Looking forward to it. Yes. Speaking of moving forward, right?
Yeah, it'd be great.
Maybe Dr. Goodwyn would like to join us with Professor Hammeroff when he turns up as well. Obviously it's entirely up to yourself, but you'd be very welcome.
Yeah, you'd be welcome.
And I'd love to do that. And El Vitae as well.
Oh yes, we haven't forgotten them.
Look at that.
They're great.
Very interested to see what they have to say.
Oh, they're lovely people. They're lovely. I know you'll get on with them. You're a person as well, so you're on the same wavelength, you know.
Oh, good. But it makes sense. It's perfect.
Yeah, and you know your mythology too, which is great because they're into that and they live it. So that's fabulous.
Yeah, I bet they are.
So we'll see you very soon, and thank you for your time. I know you're at work and you have a busy clinical practice. So blessings to you, Doctor. It's been great to meet you, and we'll speak again very soon.
Very soon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
It's wonderful to talk. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video and want to continue your study of psychosystems analysis, then check the description for links to further resources, including our Discord server, our suite of educational handbooks, and our application page for professional training under Steve and Pauline Richards, leading to accreditation as a hypnotherapist and psychotherapist. Thanks, and we'll see you in the next video.